You've lived a great life and done well for yourself. But what mark will you leave on the world? How will you inspire future generations? Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand have helped thousands of people answer exactly those questions. If you've ever wondered, what will be my legacy? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast. Now, here are your hosts, Stan and Katie Beth.
Welcome back to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with your host, Katie Beth Hand. My guest today is author Diane Heiler. And Diane, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so glad to have you with me on the show.
I'm so pleased to be here.
Absolutely. So before we jump in and talk about your book, A Widow's Fire, I was hoping that you could take a few minutes and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and also about the experiences that you had that really inspired you to write your memoir.
Well, I'm a small town girl, grew up in Dade City, Florida, which is a small town just 35 miles north of Tampa. As in a lot of small towns, I grew up and went to school for 12 years with the same kids. We still get together. They're like brothers and sisters. I came about writing this book because my husband was diagnosed with lung cancer, and it was already in the fourth stage. And it was a 2-year battle with just buying him time. But we spent those many months, 20 months actually, from the day that he was diagnosed, really battling the cancer, but also finding inspiration for each other, certainly getting closer to our God, and planning for how did we want to spend the next 20 months. We didn't know it would be 20 months. The doctor said possibly 20 months. When he died, I had gone through what was called anticipatory grief, which I didn't even know what that was before a therapist told me what was going on. I was grieving terribly, but he wasn't dead yet, and I didn't understand my feelings at the time. And so she explained to me that's what I was going through. And she said, this may help you when he finally dies to have already gotten part of the grief behind you. Well, it didn't help a whole lot. I was never so devastated in my whole life when he finally did die. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know who I was going to be. My whole life was wrapped around him and my 4 children and his 2 children. So I really went into even a deeper mourning, the worst of my whole life. And a friend said, you need to write about what you're going through and what you've been through. And I responded, I really didn't think that I was patient enough to write a book, but I did. I started writing about my life, his life, our life together. And I'm a poet, so I couldn't help but throw in some of my poems, and was lucky enough to have a great editor decide he would like to work with me. And we just had a wonderful time, and it was a good healing process for me. So my journey through this book put me in a position where I thought, if I can help somebody else who's mourning and come out the other side whole and realizing that life is for the living, we have to continue living and enjoying our life. And that's my message, is to survive.
I love that. I love it. It's a great message. It's something that a lot of people, I think, can really relate to. And the term anticipatory grief, I love that you talk about. That is something a lot of people deal with that they've never heard of, just like you had never heard of that. But it is very much a real thing. And so you mentioned that you had some counselors and I'm sure great support. But you also mentioned that you and your husband that you were people of faith. So how did that impact kind of the 20 months that you had together and then the grief process afterwards as well?
Well, the funny thing is we had been married 25 years. We were together for 4 years before we got married. The one thing we did not have in our marriage that was disappointing to me was he did not care about going to church. Now, he certainly led a Christian life. He was one of the most generous, good people that I knew. So he certainly walked the walk of a Christian, but he was not an active Christian. And he didn't like going to church because that interfered with his golf and our weekends at our beach house. And I told him at one point, I said, the one thing that is missing in our relationship is going to church. That's a part of who I am, and I wish that we would do that. Excuse me. So at the end, when he was diagnosed, we got serious about the future. And he asked me, he said, do you think that I will be going to heaven? And I said, Al, if you don't go to heaven, nobody's going to heaven. I said, you are one of the best people I know. And then he asked me, he said, would you introduce me to Father Jim, who is the priest at our Episcopal church? And that just filled my heart. And so I called Father Jim and I told him that Al would like to meet him. And he came over and they shared, I think it was a glass of bourbon, and had a wonderful talk. And then they had many talks after that. And Father Jim is the one who said the funeral mass for Al. So our life really was topped off, really and truly. We had a great marriage, but it was topped off with God with us. And when he asked me one time, what do you think it's going to be like? And I said, sweetheart, you have choices in life. I said, you can face death with a smile on your face and love in your heart, or you can go angry. But I hope you choose the smile on your face and love in your heart. And that's exactly what he did.
That's incredible. He sounds like he was an incredible man and an incredible dad. And I love that his faith journey, so often we get so busy in our lives dealing with the day-to-day things, and we always think we have tomorrow. And it's interesting because I feel like his story is common in that a lot of times it's not until that diagnosis comes, that accident happens, life changes, and then you really do you become a lot stronger in your faith. You really get serious about it. So as difficult a time as it was, I love that you guys had that time to share that kind of right there at the end of his journey. That's wonderful.
We did. A little funny here, when he was diagnosed, he said to me, I thought it'd be you that would go first. I said, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Said, what makes you say that? And he said, well, you're the one that had the breast cancer twice, and you've had all these other things. You're the one that gets sick. I've never even been to the hospital, which was true. But I thought that was so funny. So I'll say it, so male-like.
Yeah.
I thought you would go first before me. Because
Right.
A lot of men just think they're invincible, that they'll be here forever, that, they're not going to succumb to some little disease.
Right.
But he did. And he did it graciously. He really did. And he was just beautiful inside and out. And he kept saying, I don't want to leave you. And I said, well, I don't want you to leave. But the fact is, I just got a call from upstairs and they want to know what the holdup is. Now, this was just hours before he died. And everybody's saying, he's still hanging in there. He's trying.
Yeah.
But then he also kept saying, don't let them resuscitate me. I don't want to be resuscitated. And I said, I got that. I got it the first time you told me, and you've told me about 5 times now, and I got it every time. And if you tell me that one more time, I'm going to use the old pillow method.
Yeah.
We were able to laugh. We recognized the seriousness of it. We were able to say, I love you. And it's been a good run. It's been a great run. But
You told some funny stories. Obviously, you both have a great sense of humor. How did that impact this journey that you went through?
My humor has always been my fallback. And my editor said to me, Diane, he said, you crack me up. He said, you will be writing about the most serious subject that just is heart-rending, and then you crack a joke. And I said, I can't help it, Greg. I said, my brain is attached to my funny bone, and whatever goes through my brain just slides right out my tongue. And I think I take a look at my mother, my children. We all have a funny streak in us, and we crack each other up all the time. My children, my son, my three girls are hysterical. We could be on a comedy stage, but it's helped in some rough times. I'll say that. I think it's good to be able to laugh about yourself and to laugh about a funny situation. And certainly my husband had a dry sense of humor, but he was funny as all get out. When he spoke, he was highly intelligent. When he spoke, it was always well worth listening to. But when he would tell a joke, a lot of times people had no idea he was telling a joke until the punchline, because he could drag it out and be so dry that you think he's telling a true story. But it's his form of joke.
Yes, my husband is the exact same way. He has such a dry sense of humor, whereas I'm more the overt entertaining type of humor. He is so dry, but it makes it so much funnier. He cracks me up. So your husband sounds a lot like that.
Yeah, I get halfway through a joke and I'm laughing so hard I can't tell the punchline.
Right. Well, he sounds like he was great. So having gone through this whole grief process, that, like you talked about, the anticipatory grief after getting that diagnosis. And did you know, Diane, when he got his diagnosis, did you know that it was terminal, like originally from the start?
Yes, the doctor was very frank with us, and he said this is stage 4 lung cancer. It's a rare form, and there was no cure. He said there is a treatment that we could buy time with, but there is no cure. Now, I am the eternal optimist. I immediately said, but we caught it early, didn't we? And he looked at me like, really? But I'm an optimist. I always say that when I see a pile of shit, I just know there's a pony there someplace.
Right.
I'm very positive, and it's gotten me a long ways, because I think positive people do exceed in many cases, but this was a bigger job than I had ever anticipated. So we soon learned there was no escape from this. You know, we had great hopes the first 5 months, but by the 10th month, 12th month, 15th month, we knew that it was not going to last.
Yeah, that's difficult. That's certainly where that anticipatory grief comes in. Mm-hmm. So having gone through that and the grief process and then the healing process as well, if there are any of our listeners that are kind of going through this same season, what advice would you give to them?
I think everybody has to heal in their own way. And I wouldn't recommend the way I did it, but it's the only way I could do it. And I think it was hard for my children, because I have always been the strong parent in my family. My 4 children knew that I was a strong woman and very capable. I was a single mother for 15 of those years, raising them. And I certainly took the lead in the parenting role. When I became a widow, which was even hard for me to say, I was a strong woman. I was certainly capable, but I didn't even know who I was at that point. I mean, I just spent the last 22 months taking care of a man who had become my rock. I mean, he was like my right arm. He was a part of who I was, my identity. And so when he died, I was just devastated. Even though I'd gone through anticipatory grief, it did not abate any part of my mourning. So what I wanted to do, and I did, I went to my home in North Carolina that sits on top of a 4,300-foot mountain, and just pulled the covers over my head, wrote poetry, and grieved. It was a hard time of my life. The optimist that I am, and I'm also extremely impatient, I thought to myself, well, I'll give myself 2 weeks and just grieve as much as I want, and then I'll be okay. Well, that did not happen, and it doesn't work that way. I did grieve terribly. My children were with me in the beginning, and finally they said to me, "You want us to go home, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "I need to do this by myself." And they said, "It's okay to cry in front of us, Mama." And I said, "I can't. I have to do it on my own." So they did go home and to back here to Florida. And I just wanted to be alone. I did not want my friends to come see me. I don't think that's probably healthy for the average person, but for me, I wanted to be alone. My sister has a home on the same mountain, so she would come up and check on me. And I wrote poetry. Katie, I wrote poetry night and day. Hundreds of poems just were flowing out of my brain onto the paper that I was writing on. And then a friend, my husband's, texted me and said, "Did you write the poem that was on the back of your husband's prayer card at his funeral?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "Do you have more? I'd like to read it." And I said, "I have lots more." He said, "Send them to me." So I did. And then he said, "You could write a book, but you need the backstory to these poems." And I went to bed that night and thought, I have the backstory because I'm always journaling. And I had kept track of my husband's health during the 2 years that he was dying. And I had done it for years. I mean, my whole life. I'm a goal setter. I was always at the end of the day writing down what my goals were for the next day and the next year and the next 5 years and what happened during the day. So I kind of had a journal going of my life. And so I went to bed that night thinking, well, I'll just look at my journal. And I called him the next morning and I said, "I've got the backstory." And he said, "Well, I'm sending it to the the editor for my books that I had published, 7 different books on a medical topic." And he told me who it was, Greg Lawrence, who was the editor with Jackie Onassis and wrote her autobiography. And I said, "We're not in the same league. I've never written a book." And he said, "Yeah, I'd like him to look at it." Well, Greg called me and said, "You had me on the second page. I'd like to work with you." And so that's how it came about that I wrote a book.
That is really cool and such an incredible story that you took your grief and were able to really turn it into something positive that has been able to help other people and really connect, I would assume, through your grief. Have you gotten to meet or connect with a lot of people since you've published your book that have kind of been through the same type of story?
Katie, I have. And what I am so pleased with, and I told my editor this when I was working with Greg, I said, "I don't want this to just be for women. I want it to be for men too." Everybody has losses from time to time. I think one of the cutest stories was I was talking to a group of Rotarians, and this man came up to me afterwards and said, "It's so timely that you were here." He said, "I just lost my dog." And I loved it. I thought, loss is loss. You know, we lose our dogs, we lose our cats. The worst, sometimes we lose children. And that's got to be the worst test we could possibly have. But I've had so many men contact me and say, "Thank you for speaking out about the mourning and speaking out about what happened to me after the mourning." And that was called Widow's Fire. About a few weeks, a month after my husband died, I had such a need to have a hug from a man, not a woman. I have lots of girlfriends who are certainly willing to hug me, but I realized that my husband was right when he told me, "You need to move on in your life." He said, "I'll be gone, but you'll need to find someone." And I said, "No, I don't need to do that." I said, at that time I was 80 years old. And I said, "I've been married. I had a great marriage. I don't need another man in my life." And he said, "No, you will." Well, I realized he knew me better than I knew me. because I did want another man in my life. And I couldn't figure out what was happening to me, that I was feeling sexual at 80 years old and that I would want another man in my life. And I prayed to God, please, if I can't have Al, please send someone who can take his place, that I could love again, that would spend the afternoon, the evening with me, talking about our day and what we're going to do tomorrow. I needed a partner, and I didn't quite understand that. So I started researching what is causing this, and widow's fire came up. And it's very natural. It happens to both men and women. It's not just women, it's men and women. The need to have a partner. I don't think everybody feels this way. I certainly did. And I attribute it to the fact that I had a great marriage. I had a great partner, and I wanted to have another. So 2.5 months after my husband died, this same friend who talked me into writing a book texted me and said, look, all of us guys, and he was referring to my husband's racquetball friends. He said, we've been talking. We hear that you just won't even go out of the house and you won't let anybody come in. And he said, get out of the damn house. You go to the country club, do something, but get out of the house. And so my sister said, come on, let's go have dinner at the country club. And so we did. And I will tell you, I did not want to go. I was so upset about just getting out in public and being social. So my sister and I go to a country club, and we have a couple of drinks. I have 2 vodka and tonics, and I will tell you, that's a lot for me. And we're on the dance floor dancing like I don't think I've ever done before. And dear friends came up and tapped me on the shoulder and said, we'd like you to meet our friend from 55 years ago from med school. We went to school together. I turned around and I said, hi, Bob, shook his hand and said, let's dance. And we're still dancing.
That's awesome. That's so incredible. And I love that you talk about that side, that healing process in your book as well, and really bring some awareness to this idea of a widow's fire, because I think that's something that most people don't realize is common and happens. And so being able to really spotlight that and normalize that is something really powerful that has come out of your book.
How many people say, if something happened to my husband, I'd never get married again? I said it long before Al even got sick. Even if I've been married, I don't need to do this again. But when reality sets in and you find yourself alone, and you think, I really miss having someone to talk to. And I hear so many single women and men say, if I just had someone who would go to dinner with me or to share a good conversation with. That's what we want, is a good friendship again. But I think if you've had a good marriage, you would like another one. Now, at this stage, I am 82. I don't plan on getting married again. Bob and I've talked about it. He doesn't feel the need to get married again. And it would just be a lot of complications. It's right. A lot easier this way. And we've been together now for 2 years. And we have a great relationship.
That's wonderful and very hope inspiring for people that kind of go through this process. It's interesting. You said it can be kind of, messy to very complicated to get remarried again later in life. So I actually work for an estate planning law firm. And so this is the type of thing we have to help people walk through, is people that have been married a long time. They have adult children. They have different houses and assets. And what does that look like in trying to recombine all those things? But I definitely understand that just need for companionship. Like you said, your marriage was wonderful. And I would imagine it's probably even harder because it was such a great marriage and you guys were together for such a long time. That gaping hole that's there of no one to talk to and no one to eat dinner with and no one to help you fold the laundry at the end of the day. I imagine it just makes all of that seem so much worse, so much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, final question, and then I promise I'll let you get back to your day. This is so interesting. So, through the work that you do, the experiences that you've had, the people that you've been able to connect with and encourage through your book, what is it that you hope your legacy will be?
I hope that my legacy is a roadmap for my children, my friends, and anyone who's willing to listen to me or read my book, but a roadmap to survival, and understand that you may lose a great love in your life, but life goes on and we have to keep living. And I believe my God wants me happy. I believe that everyone's God wants happiness. And the only way we can do it is get out there and do it. Dance like nobody's watching.
I love it. That is great advice, not just for this situation, but for life in general. So thank you for sharing that with us. And for our listeners, we also want to thank you guys for listening to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with your host, Katie Beth Hand. And my guest today was Diane Heiler. And to connect with Diane, you can visit awidowsfire.com, and you can also get a copy of your own of her book on Amazon. We're going to link those for you in the show notes. When you visit the website, you will find a link for all of the different social medias where you can connect with Diane and learn more from her. So Diane, I know you are busy, and I appreciate you taking time out of your afternoon to come and share all of your wisdom with us. And I wish you all the best of luck with the book.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more about Stan and Katie Beth, go to pinnaclelegacylaw.com. You can also find links in the show notes.